Welcome to this class about advanced gradient descent. This class is organized as follows. First, I will give you a reminder about vanilla gradient descent because I want this video to be self-contained. Then I will present to you advanced gradient descent methods based on that particular paper from Pierrot, Perrin and myself. And let me say that I won't cover adaptive gradient descent methods such as ADAM, RMS-Prop, etc., which are a lot used in gradient descent libraries. Okay, but for that I propose you to read this paper from Sebastian Rüder, which is very nice, and you can also find a lot of material on the web about this. And let me say also that the underlying motivation for that particular class is explaining gradient descent concept just because they are a lot used in deep reinforcement learning, and deep reinforcement learning is my field. So first, a reminder about vanilla gradient descent. So basically what is it? In general, you have a function, which is a cost function, let's say, that you know through an equation, and you want to find a minimum over this cost function. As we will see, gradient descent will look for this minimum in an iterative way with some local steps. You are there and then you perform a steps, you are here and here and here and so on. So you want to reach the minimum after as few steps as possible. Okay, and for performing each step we need two things. We need the directions, shall we go there or there, and we need a step size. Okay, shall we make a big step or a small step? And I will treat the two questions looking for a direction and a step size in the following slides. So first, how do we get the right direction? So the general idea is that if you know that the function is going this way, certainly the right direction is toward this way to go to this minimum. And I will explain to you why the first order approximation, so the first order derivative of the function at that particular point, gives us the best direction. That's okay. So more technically, we have some loss function that I will note L of theta. Okay, and we want to perform a step delta theta. That's the step that we are doing here. So we want to minimize the loss of theta plus delta theta, and the question is how to choose that particular delta theta. Finding that delta theta is easy. First, we have to consider that the optimum of delta theta is reached when the derivative of the loss of theta plus delta theta over delta theta is null. Because, as you know, you reach the minimum of a function or the optimum of a function where its derivative is null. But this loss of delta plus delta theta can be approximated at the first order using the Taylor method as L of theta plus the gradient of L of theta over theta times delta theta plus a constant times a kind of delta theta squares, and then higher order terms that we will ignore here. Okay. Now, if we take the derivative of this formula, we get this. Okay, here there is no delta theta, so it is removed. This one just gives a constant here, and this one just gives 2 nu of delta theta. Okay, so when this derivative is null, you have this equals 0, so we get delta theta equals minus 1 over 2 nu gradient of loss of theta over theta. And we can rewrite this formula with replacing this term by an alpha. Okay, so as you can see, we get the best delta theta just by using the gradient or the first order derivative of the loss of theta over theta. Okay, and the iteration rule of the gradient descent technique will be theta at index I plus 1 is theta at index I minus sub alpha, which is a constant, times the gradient of L of theta over theta. So with this simple mathematical explanation, you see that the steepest descent direction, the one that minimizes the that finds the optimum delta theta so as to minimize this. So the steepest descent direction is given by the first order derivative. Okay. Now the second question is, how do we find the right step size? Okay. The general idea is that we know that the gradient gives the right direction, but minimizing the first order derivative is not lower bounded. Okay, so the first order derivative is not lower bounded, so we cannot minimize it because we would go to minus infinity. So we need a step size alpha to determine how far to go along this particular line. Okay, and you can see on these plots that if alpha is too small, it will take you a lot of steps before you reach the minimum. Okay, so it will be too long. If you take big steps, you may overshoot, so you may be too far away from the minimum, and eventually you may even fall into a different region where you have a different minimum. So here you would have the case where the step size is adequate. So if too small, you take too many steps. If the alpha is too large, you may miss a local optimum. And one technique to find the best step size is called line search. It's used in algorithms like such as TRPO, which is a standard deep reinforcement learning algorithm, where in fact you take a step size, and if it's too small, you increase it. If it's too large, you decrease it. So you iterate to find the best step size of your few iterations.
One important thing about gradient descent is that it is very sensitive to local optima. Okay, that's a local improvement approach, where at each step you follow the steepest descent direction, but you don't know what the optimum target is. Okay, so unless your cost function is convex, okay, in which case you just have one global optimum, gradient descent can end up in different local optima depending on both the starting point and on noise. Okay, so if you start from here, you will end up here, which is probably the best local optimum. But if you start here, you will end up here, which is not the best local optimum. Okay, and by the way, if you are starting from here, but if you are having some noise here, you may diverge to different trajectories, one ending up here, one here, one here, and one here. So you can see that you are very sensitive to noise. Okay, so the only thing you are sure about when you are using gradient descent is that it goes down, and anything that basically goes down will end up somewhere low, but you have no guarantee at all that you will end up in the best local optimum. Now, a different point that you have to consider about vanilla gradient descent is that it has a few drawbacks. First, always following the steepest gradient descent direction does not necessarily result in the lowest minimum. That's what we have just seen. So for instance, if you are here and you follow the steepest descent, you will end up here and not there. Okay, quite obviously. And by the way, also, you won't reach the optimum you reach through the shortest path. Here you have an example. If you just follow the steepest gradient descent, you will go that way to this optimum, or to this one actually. Okay, but if you could climb the bump here, you would go in a much shorter way to that particular local optimum. Okay, so in those cases, using momentum, that's something that we will see later on, can help escape from local optima, because it allows you to climb bumps due to your momentum when it's useful. Okay, and what we will see later in the few slides is that adaptive and second order gradient descent techniques can help finding better minima or shorter paths through different techniques. Okay, another limitation is that vanilla gradient descent may converge very slowly if the step size is not properly tuned. We have seen this. Okay, that's why a few people use line search so as to find the best step size. Okay, but another point that we have not seen yet is that the efficiency on gradient descent depends on the parametrization theta. Okay, if you are using a neural network with weights theta or a different structure with different parameters theta, then gradient descent will have different effects. Okay, because for instance, if one neuron is related to every other neuron. Changing particularly this weight will have more effect than changing the weight of an output neuron, for instance. Okay, and gradient descent won't be sensitive to that particular structure. Okay, vanilla gradient descent won't be sensitive to the structure of the neural network. That's something that we will consider later with different techniques. So we will focus on two lines of improvement. First, we will have a look at first order methods such as the natural gradient descent technique, which introduces a particular matrix to restrict gradient steps and make them more independent to the parametrization choice. And we will also consider second order methods which use the Hessian matrix instead of the Jacobian matrix, so the Hessian matrix of the loss or its approximation to take into account the local curvature of the function when we are optimizing. Okay, and about gradient descent techniques, the most important paper is the one from Amari where it is defined. Okay, so let's go to those more advanced techniques. First, a general consideration. As I said previously, if you are using a first order gradient descent technique, you are using some line here and you need to define a step size because you could go down indefinitely far away, so towards minus infinity. If you use a second order method, then you use something which is a quadratic function this way, okay? And you can see that with such functions, you get some natural potential optimum, which would be there, which is the minimum of your quadratic function. Okay, so these functions can provide a true minimum in the particular case where the corresponding matrix is symmetric and positive definite. We will see what happens when it's not the case and how we can deal with that. Okay, but in both cases, the derivative is accurate only very locally close to the point where you are computing the derivative. If you are here, then your derivative is far away from the cost function, and that's the same here. Okay, your optimum is not exactly there; it's a little more there. So in both cases, you should consider the derivative as accurate only very locally. So the gradient step using these functions should not be applied too far away from the current point. That's why we will define a trust region where the gradient can be trusted. If you are too far away from the current point, then we should not trust the gradient, and that's what we want to deal with. Okay, so how can we define a trust region? The general idea is to add a constraint on the distance between the current point and something. Okay, so if we want to perform safe steps, sorry, that's not states, that's steps, we put the constraints on how far we can go from the current point. So we still want to minimize the delta theta that provides the best decrease of the loss. Okay, but we will add a constraint here that delta theta times some matrix delta theta transpose times some matrix times delta theta is inferior to a very small number that will be an epsilon, and we use it squared so as to simplify calculations later on. And in that particular constraints, m of theta has to be some symmetric and positive definite matrix, and we will see that different choices of m of theta corresponds to different algorithms. Let's have a closer look now at what it does. Okay, so visually, let's consider that we have our loss function, and the loss function is the best here. So our local optimum is here, and here you have different lines of equivalent values of the gradient, and here that's our current point. If we are using as the m theta matrix the identity, then we want to constrain epsilon to be into this circular area. Okay, so the best we can do is go here and we get this value of the gradient. But if we take a different m matrix, which may correspond to that particular ellipse, then still with the same constraint, we can perform that step for theta and go much further or much closer to the local optimum. Okay. So the idea is that different metrics m of theta will affect the gradient step size. Okay, that size is much larger than this one, but also the direction. Here we are going in this direction. Here we are going in that direction. Okay, so the colored ellipses that you could get using different m of theta correspond to different thrust regions. More mathematically, how can we deal with this calculation? So as I said, I still want to find a delta theta that provides the best decrease in the loss of theta plus delta theta. Okay, I can approximate this loss using first order Taylor approximation. This way, we have already seen this. Okay, I am ignoring higher order terms. And the idea is that the loss of theta does not depend on delta theta. So it can be removed from the minimization problem. I want to minimize something on delta theta, so I can ignore a constant. Okay, so the problem that we had defined before can be reformulated as finding the mean over delta theta of the gradient of the loss over theta times delta theta under this particular constraint. Okay, and now the question is, how can we solve it? Actually, the Lagrangian of the term that I was considering before is this, okay, where nu is a Lagrange multiplier. So the optimum of delta theta will be found when the derivative of the Lagrangian is null. Okay. So if I take the derivative of this, I obtain that. Okay. Choose if I take this to be null, then I have 0 equals that, or I can say delta of theta is that term divided by this one. So that's minus 1 over 2 mu's times the inverse of m of theta times the gradient of the loss. Okay, and m of theta has to be symmetric and positive definite so that it can be invertible in any case. Okay. So I can rewrite that particular term as alpha, okay, and I can get this complicated calculation for alpha. But finally, I get something which is theta at I plus 1 is theta at I minus alpha times a factor of the gradient of the loss, okay? And in the particular case where the M matrix is the identity, I get vanilla gradient descent again. Okay. So what I will show you in the next slides is that I can take different values from m of theta. Okay. So if I take m of theta is the identity, I go back to vanilla gradient descent. That's what I just said. If I take that particular matrix for m of theta, I get classical Gauss-Newton. For this one, I get the natural gradient with an empirical Fisher matrix. For this one, I take the gradient covariant matrix. For that, that's the Hessian, I get Newton's method. And for that more complicated one, I get the generalized Gauss-Newton method. Okay, so those 6 forms for m of theta corresponds to 6 popular variants of the gradient descent. Okay, and in the first 3, what is important is that the m of theta will not depend on the loss. You have no term about the loss in those matrices. Okay, whereas in these ones you will see that they are related to the loss. Okay, let me also say that the first 4 techniques are first order techniques. Okay, the last 2 are second order methods because you can see that here you have a Hessian and here you have a Hessian too. Okay, and again, if you want to know more about all these matrices, I encourage you to have a look at the paper that we wrote with Thomas Pirot and Nicolas Perrin about these things. And in the following slides, I will explain to you all these techniques one by one. Let's first consider the classical Gauss-Newton method. So the idea is that in vanilla gradient descent, the constraint is expressed this way, where I here is the identity matrix, so you can just remove that term. And that means that in fact we want the parameters in the parameter space to move in such a way that the distance in the parameter space is inferior to epsilon squared. Okay, so this acts as if all components of theta had the same importance, which is not necessarily the same. In fact, we are not much interested in the distance in the parameter space. We are more interested in the distance in the output space of the function that we are optimizing. So for instance, a controller, if it's reinforcement learning. So what you would like to do instead is to constrain the output h theta of x for a given input of the function to optimize. You would like this h theta to move not too far away, so that when you in the same state, if you take the previous policy and the new policy, the actions that they are proposing are not too different. Okay, that's an example. So if we want to constrain the output here, in fact, we want to minimize the expectation over the different inputs of h of theta plus delta theta minus h of theta and all squared. Okay. If we take, as usual, a first order approximation of that particular term, in fact, that's the Jacobian j of x of theta times delta theta. Okay. So in this calculation, gx of theta is the Jacobian of the function which relates h theta of x to theta. Okay. So after a quick calculation, again I'm taking this expectation that I want to minimize. I can rewrite it with the Jacobian here instead. So I can rewrite it in that particular way. Okay, I am just expanding the squared so that I move the delta of theta out of the expectation here and here. So in fact, I want to minimize the function f, the matrix m of theta, which is expressed this way. Okay, and as you can see in all what I have said here, the loss function L of theta never appeared. So this method, as well as the next methods that we will see, are completely independent of the loss function. We want to have the constraint on the output and not on the loss itself. Okay. By the way, sorry, when I am trying to minimize this, I want this particular matrix to be SPD, but it's not always the case. Okay. This matrix is symmetric. Okay, you can see it from its shape, but it might not be definite positive. You might have some dimensions where it's positive and some dimensions where it's negative. Okay, so the idea is that we will add a damping term lambda times identity, and the greater the lambda you apply to the negative directions. In fact, when you apply it to the negative dimensions, they will slowly become positive. So if you take a lambda that is large enough, finally you will get something where in all dimensions the approximation is positive. Okay, so finally we define m of theta as this term plus lambda times identity, and we take lambda as small as possible until the matrix becomes SPD. The second method is the natural policy gradient method. That's probably the most important one because it is a lot used in deep reinforcement learning techniques. So in the previous technique, we were trying to perform gradient descent onto a deterministic object, okay, where we were considering its deterministic output h of theta for a given input x. Okay. Now we are considering a stochastic object, okay, and we want the output of this stochastic object to stay close to each other. So to constrain stochastic object to stay close to each other, one thing that we can use, which is very standard, is the Kullback-Leibler or KL divergence. Okay, and the KL divergence has a lot of important properties that are used in natural policy gradient descent. So the most important property is illustrated here. Here you have 2 points, P1 and P2, with different variance. A large variance, average variance, or a middle variance, and a small variance. And you can see that with a large variance, the KL divergence between those two Gaussian distribution is rather small. This one is intermediate, and then this one is large. Okay, so the idea is that you get a smaller KL divergence if your variance is large. It means that if you want to stay under epsilon, Okay, it's you can go further away between P1 and P2 if your variance is large than if it's small. Okay, so if you are performing gradient descent under some epsilon constraint, if you first make the variance small, then you cannot move far away between P1 and P2, so you are stuck somewhere. Okay, whereas if you are using a large variance and first move P1 away from P2, then it's okay, your KL divergence will stay inferior to some value. So in practice, when you will perform gradient descent under some KL divergence constraint, what will happen is that first the mean will converge to something and then the variance will be reduced. And due to that particular property, variance will stay large for a long time, and this will, in deep reinforcement learning, this will ensure a large amount of exploration, because your variance provides you exploration, because you will try different actions when your variance is large, and not so different actions when your variance is small. Okay. So that's a very interesting property for the convergence of policy search, because it provides you with a significant enough amount of exploration. Okay. Some other properties are listed in the paper that is the basis of this presentation. And the idea is that many reinforcement learning algorithms are using natural policy gradient. So that's the case of the natural actor critique and episodic natural actor critique former algorithms from Jan Peters, also relative entropy policy search, TR-Pirot, etc., etc. There are many more. Okay. And this time I won't give you the mathematical calculation, but the expression of the matrix is this particular way. Okay. And we can also add some damping term if this matrix is not positive definite. A third technique is the gradient covariant matrix. Okay, that's a different idea from the two previous ones. This time we will minimize something completely different. Again, we go back to something deterministic, but instead of minimizing a distance between the output of the function, we will consider each sample independently from each other. So we take all samples and we will minimize the loss at that particular sample minus the loss at that particular samples, the loss using delta theta at the same sample. Okay, and we will take the squared the expectation of the squared differences for the different samples. Again, if I take this expression and I take a first order approximation, I get something like that. Okay, and I can simplify it finally getting that particular matrix. Okay, and that particular matrix, which is my m of theta, is called the gradient covariance matrix, or it's also called by Yann Olivier, for instance, the outer product metric. Okay, and if the loss is the negative log likelihood that particular way, in fact we recover the empirical feature, the matrix that we have seen just before. So if you replace the gradient of L of theta here by that particular expression, you get exactly the matrix, the m of theta matrix that we had before, corresponding to the natural policy gradient or the natural gradient method. Okay, so the gradient covariant matrix is just more general than natural gradient descent because it's with more general expression of the loss. Whereas natural gradient uses necessarily that particular form for the loss. Okay. A fourth method, this time, is a second order method. That's Newton's method. So the idea is that instead of using a first order derivative, a first order approximation of the gradient, we will use a second order approximation that will take the Hessian into account. So instead of following the gradient using straight lines, we are now using quadratic functions. Okay, so Newton's method is the second order counterpart of the gradient covariance matrix method. Okay. This time, if we take the second order approximation, again we approximate the loss of theta plus delta theta, so we get this term, and we add that particular term corresponding to the second order, where h of theta is the Hessian matrix of the loss. Okay, and the idea is that this approximation is accurate as long as that particular term is small enough. Okay. So instead of constraining on the first order terms, we will constrain just on the second order term. And you can see that immediately we get Fm of theta is the Hessian matrix. Okay, that's quite easy to understand. And finally, that there is the generalized Gauss-Newton techniques. That's our sixth method. Okay, and okay. Again, I encourage you to go back to the Pierrot et al. Paper because this method is more complicated to understand, and I won't explain it into details here. And the sixth method that I have not covered in those final slides is in fact the first. That's the vanilla gradient descent technique. Okay, so now you have an overview of the 6 possibilities for m of theta. Now let's go into different things, which is how we will compute those gradient method. Okay. So to solve the constraint optimization problem, as we have seen in a few instances in previous slide, we need to invert m of theta. Okay. This is why we need it to be symmetric positive definite. Okay. And we have seen that we can use damping for that. But estimating and inverting the Fisher or the Gauss-Newton matrix is very costly because if theta is, for instance, the weights of a neural network, it can be a very, very long vector with million weights. Okay, so you won't be able to represent into your computer a matrix with million rows and million columns. That's not possible. Okay. So in fact, in practice, there are many algorithms that are doing something approximate with respect to doing that precisely. That's the case of the K-FAC and K-Ferret algorithms, where instead of using the complete matrix, you will use block diagonal approximation of the Gauss-Newton matrix. This is also the case in that particular paper from Joel Lehman, Jeff Clune, Ken Stanley, etc. Interestingly, that this is not a deep reinforcement learning paper, that's more an evolutionary paper. And interestingly, they present a technique where when you look at the math, in fact, you can figure out that they are using the diagonal approximation of the Gauss-Newton matrix, but they don't state it that way in their paper. So probably they did not even figure out that this is what they are doing. Okay. In TRPO, they are doing something different. In fact, they use a conjugate gradient method, where in fact you are just doing some vector multiplication, so you avoid using matrices. Okay, so you don't have to represent this too large matrix corresponding to neural networks. And finally, natural actor critique and episodic natural actor critique use a mathematical fact, which is that under some compatibility condition, the empirical Fisher calculation just simplifies and vanishes away. So you can compute a step, a natural gradient step, without computing the Fisher matrix. And finally, this conjugate gradient technique that is used by TRPO is also called Hessian-free method. So very often in papers you will find the title Hessian-free technique, which in fact corresponds to using a second order method without computing the Hessian matrix, but in general using conjugate gradient technique. I wanted to say a last thing about momentum. I won't cover all the adaptive gradient techniques. Okay, but about momentum, I want to say something. So it can be the case that at some point along the shortest spice, you have to increase the cost function instead of decreasing it. Okay. That's also the case that you might be interested in increasing the cost function to escape from a local minimum so as to go into a deeper one. Okay. So in such case, momentum will help you follow the shortest path by climbing the bump. But I wanted to show you that momentum can be a good idea, but it can also be a bad idea. So you are in that particular context, due to momentum, your gradient will go over this bump and fall into this one. So that's a very good idea to use momentum here. But in that particular case, you will also go over this bump and end up into that one. So that's a bad idea because this minimum is worse than this one. Okay. So in fact, using those adaptive gradient techniques might be good or bad. That depends just on the cost function landscape. And that's the case for all the 6 methods that we have seen, that some will be better than other ones depending on the cost function. And there is no general rule. In fact, we performed a study with students using the 6 methods on different landscapes and showing that no method was defeating the other ones. Okay, so if you are using other adaptive gradient techniques like RMS-Prop, Adam, Nesterov, etc., which are well covered into that paper, and you will also find some blogs and videos online about those techniques, that's also the case that using this one or this one depends, is best depending on the cost function. So to summarize what I have said in this video, I have presented to you 6 different well-founded methods which will give you 6 directions and 6 step size for gradient descent. One point is that all 6 directions are in the same half plane as vanilla gradient descent. So vanilla gradient descent is probably something already quite good because it provides you with the general direction. Okay, so an open question is, does the direction really matter? Okay, and from our study with students, we are not sure that it matters actually. And the idea is that this is because you are performing very local steps without knowing where is your optimum. So those local steps will be good highly dependently on the cost landscape. Okay. And we have seen that, in fact, there is a no-free lunch effect, that each method might be the best in some landscape, and another method will be the best on a different landscape. About the step size, this also, of course, depends a lot on your cost landscape, because if your cost landscape is very flat, you can take large steps, whereas if it's with many hills, then you should be more cautious. So using line search as they do in TRPO and PPO is probably a very good idea, because you can tune your step size depending on your round step. And a very interesting question that we are investigating with colleagues, in particular Nicolas Perrin, is trying to understand why Adam is often superior in many deep neural networks applications to other adaptive techniques or second-order techniques, and that's not clear at all at the moment why. Thank you for listening, and if you have any question, don't hesitate to reach me with this email address. Bye-bye.